The coffee mug shattered across the linoleum before anyone in the diner understood what had just happened. 1 second, Caleb Hollister was standing in the doorway of Maybell's road stop, the bell above the door still trembling from his entrance. The next second, his hand had simply opened. The ceramic exploded against the floor like a small gunshot, and coffee sprayed out in a dark fan across the boots of a trucker sitting too close to the door. Nobody moved to clean it up. Because behind that counter, behind the smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee, and the soft hiss of the grill stood his father, Walter Hollister, 79 years old, the right side of his face the color of a thunderstorm. His knuckles split and wrapped in athletic tape that had started to come loose at the edges. His apron dark with something that had once been blood and was now just a stain he hadn't bothered to wash out because there were eggs to crack and coffee to pour and a diner full of people who needed feeding. Caleb's voice came out lower than he intended. Lower and flatter and somehow more dangerous for it. "Who hurt my father?" And the entire diner went absolutely still. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart pounding, please subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to that diner, because what happened next changed everything. The thing about Maybell's road stop was that it had never once been mistaken for anything other than exactly what it was. It wasn't charming. It wasn't quaint. The boots were patched with silver duct tape that had been there so long it had turned yellow at the edges. The ceiling fan wobbled on every third rotation like it was reconsidering the whole enterprise. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, and Maybell herself, God rest her, had been dead 11 years. But nobody had ever changed the sign because nobody could imagine what else to call the place. It sat beside Highway 287 in northern Texas like something the road had spit out and forgotten. Truckers stopped there. Oil pipe workers on their way out to the field stopped there. Old veterans who didn't have anywhere particular to be stopped there and stayed for hours nursing one cup of coffee while the waitresses pretended not to notice the wet sheen in their eyes. It was the kind of place where you came when you needed silence more than food. And silence was something the diner had always been very good at providing. Walter Hollister had owned it for going on 22 years. He had bought it after the accident that took his wife, after the years of drifting that followed, after his son had disappeared into something Walter didn't have good enough words for. He had bought it because he needed something to tend, a place that needed him to show up at 4:30 in the morning and unlock the door and turn on the lights and get the coffee going before the first trucker knocked. Walter was a small man, 5'8" on a good day, and he'd lost a quarter inch of that somewhere in his 70s. His hands were the hands of a man who had worked with them his entire life, thick through the knuckles, permanently roughened. The kind of hands that could repair an engine or roll biscuit dough with equal authority. He wore the same thing every day. White undershirt under a flannel, khaki work pants, boots he'd had resoled 3 times. He moved behind that counter the way a man moves in a space that belongs to him completely, without wasted motion, without showing off. People liked Walter, not in the way that meant they found him charming or entertaining, in the way that meant he had spent 22 years being reliably decent to strangers, and strangers remembered that in a world that had stopped expecting it. At 6 o'clock in the morning, on a Tuesday in early November, the diner held 11 people. 4 truckers distributed between 2 booths and 2 counter stools. A couple in the corner who looked like they'd been driving through the night, the woman asleep against the man's shoulder. 2 oil pipe workers sitting across from each other, not talking, working through plates of eggs with the mechanical focus of men who had early shifts. An old veteran named Frank Delaney who came in every morning at 5:58 and ordered the same thing he'd ordered for a decade. Black coffee, 2 biscuits, a side of sausage gravy. He always left exactly $3 on the counter, regardless of the total. Frank had served in the Persian Gulf in 1991 Navy electrician's mate, the kind of work that came back to him in his dreams sometimes when the wind got loud against his trailer windows. And then at the far end of the counter, a young waitress named Hollis Briggs, 19 years old, refilling the coffee carafe and trying to decide whether the tiredness she felt was from the overnight shift or from something heavier she didn't have good language for yet. Walter was behind the grill. Hollis had noticed the bruising around his eye the moment she'd arrived for her shift at 5. And she had asked him, and he had said, "Don't worry about it, honey," in the voice men of his generation used when they wanted a conversation to be finished. And Hollis, who had learned from experience that pushing Walter Hollister on something he decided not to discuss was roughly as productive as pushing a mountain, had let it go. But she hadn't stopped noticing. The way he turned slightly when he thought she wasn't watching, so she couldn't see the right side of his face directly. The way he reached for the coffee pot with his left hand instead of his right, which was not his natural hand, and moved a half-second slower than usual. The bruised and swollen knuckles he'd wrapped with athletic tape that he probably thought was less obvious than it was. Walter Hollister had been in a fight, and whatever had happened, he had decided that the diner was going to open this morning like it always opened, and the coffee was going to be made, and the eggs were going to go on the grill, and the world was going to continue turning, because that was the only way Walter Hollister knew how to do things. Hollis understood that. She respected it, but she did not stop noticing. The bell above the door rang at 6:12. Nobody in the diner looked up right away. The bell rang roughly every 4 to 7 minutes during the breakfast rush, and the conditioned response of regulars was to register the sound without turning. A kind of ambient awareness that another body had entered the space without requiring visual confirmation. But then the bell stopped ringing and the door didn't close. And the quality of silence that followed was different from ordinary silence. It had weight in it. One of the truckers looked up first. Then, because of the expression on his face, the trucker across the aisle from him looked up too. Then Hollis turned from the coffee station, and she saw him standing in the doorway. And for a moment, she didn't understand what she was seeing. He was enormous. Not the kind of enormous that was simply height or width, but the kind that came from density. A man who gave the impression that more of him existed per square foot than seemed physically reasonable. He was wearing a leather jacket so old the black had faded to charcoal gray in patches, and across the back and arms of it were patches that had been there so long they'd been washed into near illegibility. He was 58 years old, and you could see all of those years in him. The weathering, the damage, the endurance. His hair was gray at the temples and shorter than it had once been. His jaw was a thing you could break a hand on. Hollis didn't know his name yet, but she could see from the way the truckers in the closest booth had gone completely still that this was a man people knew about. Caleb Hollister stood in the doorway and looked at his father behind the counter, and the coffee mug in his hand simply fell. He didn't throw it. He didn't drop it deliberately. His hand just opened the way a hand opens when the rest of a person's body is doing something more urgent, when every resource has been redirected toward processing what the eyes are reporting. The ceramic hit the linoleum and exploded. Coffee sprayed across the floor in a dark fan. Nobody moved. Walter looked up from the grill. He saw his son. Something moved across the old man's face. Something complicated and layered. The way a man's face looks when he is simultaneously deeply glad to see someone and deeply afraid of what that someone is about to do. Caleb. Walter's voice was measured. Careful. You didn't tell me you were coming. Before we go further, I want to tell you about the man who had just walked through that door. Because to understand what happened in that diner over the next 30 days, you need to understand who Caleb Hollister had been and what he had spent 18 years trying not to be again. 18 years before that November morning, Caleb Hollister had been 40 years old and lying on his back in a hospital bed in Wichita Falls with 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a knife wound that had come within half an inch of his femoral artery. He had been a fully patched member of the Iron Vow Motorcycle Club for 16 years at that point, and he had reached the rank where his name traveled ahead of him in rooms he hadn't yet walked into. The fight that had put him in that bed had been over something he could no longer remember clearly. Something about a shipment. Something about a man named Cole who had spoken to him in a tone Caleb had decided he could not let stand. Caleb had walked into a bar in Stillwater, Oklahoma, alone, against the advice of 3 different brothers who had told him to wait, and within 40 minutes he had been on the floor of that bar with 5 men around him, and Cole standing over him with a folding knife. And the only reason Caleb was still breathing was that one of the bar's regulars had called the sheriff's department before the situation finished playing out. Walter Hollister had sat in the chair beside Caleb's hospital bed for 3 days without saying anything. Walter had been 57 then, younger than Caleb was now, already running the diner, already a widower. He had driven up from Texas the moment he got the call, and he had not gone home for 3 nights. He had eaten cafeteria food and slept in the chair and watched his son breathe through a tube. On the third morning, when Caleb finally opened his eyes and recognized where he was, Walter had not lectured him. Walter had said, "I'm not asking you to change, son. I'm just asking you to live." That was all. He had said it in the same voice he used when he asked a customer how their morning was going. The same voice he used when he flipped an egg. Caleb had looked at his father across the hospital sheet at the gray that had started in Walter's temples and was working its way through the rest of his hair, at the hands folded carefully in Walter's lap, at the entire shape of a man who had lost a wife and was now sitting beside a son. He was trying very hard not to lose, and Caleb had understood something he had been refusing to understand for 16 years. He had built an entire identity around the idea that he was not the kind of man who could be reached. And his father had reached him anyway. Not through anger, not through guilt, through the simple, unbearable fact of having shown up and stayed. Caleb had handed in his colors 4 months later. He had ridden out to the Iron Vows clubhouse in Wichita Falls on a Saturday afternoon, and he had taken his vest off in front of the men who had been his brothers for 16 years, and he had said 3 sentences and walked out. They had let him go. The vow did not let men go easily, but they let Caleb Hollister go partly because of what he had done for the club over those 16 years, and partly because of who his grandfather had been before any of them were born. For the next 18 years, Caleb had built something else. He had worked construction in New Mexico for 10 years. He had come back to Texas 4 years ago and bought a small piece of land outside Mineral Wells and put a single wide on it and learned how to keep chickens. He had not been a peaceful man. He had been a man holding peace in his hands every day the way you hold a candle in the wind. Carefully, with awareness, with the constant knowledge that the flame could go out or the flame could catch something else on fire, and either outcome was the same outcome, which was that the work of 18 years would be undone in a single afternoon. He had not put on this vest in 18 years. It still rode in the saddlebag of his motorcycle, folded, waiting. He had not been able to bring himself to throw it away, and he had not been able to bring himself to put it back on, and that contradiction was the precise shape of his entire adult life. He had received the call about Walter at 3:45 that morning from Hollis Briggs, who had found Walter's emergency contact card in the register drawer and worked her way down it until somebody picked up. Caleb had been on his bike by 4. He had ridden through the dark with the cold finding every gap in his jacket and his mind running ahead of him to the diner. And somewhere outside Stephenville, he had passed a billboard for a casino he had not thought about in 25 years, and a feeling he could not yet name had moved through him like weather across a field. By the time he reached Maybell's, the sun had been up for an hour, and he had walked through the door and the mug had fallen, and now he was standing in front of his father and the entire diner was watching. Caleb crossed the diner in 5 steps. He stopped at the counter. He was close enough now that the whole right side of Walter's face was visible. The black eye, the swelling along the cheekbone, the small cut above the orbital ridge that had been cleaned but not stitched. "Who," Caleb said very quietly, "hurt my father?" He wasn't shouting. He wasn't performing for the room. The question was direct and simple and delivered in a voice so low and flat that it somehow carried farther than a shout would have. Every person in the diner heard it. And every person in the diner knew, in the way animals know before a storm, that the answer to that question was going to change the temperature of everything. Walter set down the spatula. He reached across the counter with his left hand and gripped his son's forearm once firmly. "It's nothing, son. It's handled. Your eye isn't handled. Your hand isn't handled." Caleb didn't pull his arm away, but he didn't relax either. "Who did this to you?" "Caleb." "Dad." One word, but Walter Hollister closed his mouth. Hollis Briggs was watching all of this from the end of the counter. She had her hands wrapped around the coffee carafe and she was holding it so tightly her knuckles had gone white, and she realized she was the only person in this diner who knew the full answer to the question this man was asking. She also realized from the look Caleb Hollister turned toward her that he knew she knew. "You were here," he said, not a question. "Yes, sir." Tell me what happened. Hollis, Walter said her name. One syllable, a warning. The same tone he used when he wanted a conversation finished. But Caleb kept his eyes on Hollis. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't change his expression. He just waited with the particular patience of a man who had learned that patience was more frightening than pressure. Hollis looked at Walter. Walter looked at his son. And Walter, for the first time in the 2 years she had worked for him, looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. Let her talk, Caleb said quietly. Please. That please was what did it. Hollis set down the coffee carafe. She took a breath. It was last night, she said. Around 10. The diner had been nearly empty by 10. Just 2 customers left, both regulars. A retired schoolteacher named Vera, who sometimes stayed late reading, and a night shift mechanic named Dale, who stopped in after his shift ended. Walter had been doing end-of-night inventory behind the counter. Hollis had been wiping down tables. The door had opened and 4 young men had walked in. She had known immediately that something was wrong. Not from anything specific, not from the volume of their voices or the way they walked, though both of those things had been aggressive. It was something more intuitive, a reading of the room that she had developed over 2 years of working late shifts in a highway diner. These were not men who were hungry. These were not men who needed coffee. These were men who were looking for an audience. The loudest one, Hollis said. Dark hair, tan, expensive watch. He took the center booth like he owned the whole place. Name, Caleb said. Hollis hesitated. His name, Caleb said again. Still quiet, still patient, still the most frightening thing she had encountered in recent memory. Tristan Ashford, Vincent Ashford's son. Something shifted in the diner. The name itself did something to the room. Not fear exactly, but the particular tension that came with hearing a name that everyone present had feelings about. Caleb's expression didn't change, but Hollis noticed that his jaw had tightened by approximately 1 degree. Keep going, he said. Tristan Ashford had ordered a round of food like he was doing them a favor by being there. His 3 friends had spread across the booth with the territorial ease of young men who had never once been told that space belonged to someone else. They were loud. They were careless. They called Hollis sweetheart and babe in the way that was designed to signal that they could not because they wanted anything specific. Hollis had been working her way through it. She was practiced at working her way through it. It was when she went back to refill their water glasses, a routine trip, nothing more than that Tristan had reached out and grabbed her wrist. Not violently. That was almost the worst part. Not violently, but casually. The way you might stop someone to ask a question with the complete confidence that the action required no permission and would meet no resistance. His friends had laughed. Hollis had stood very still. She had learned through trial and error that going still was better than reacting. That reaction gave men like this exactly what they wanted, which was evidence of their own power. You got somewhere to be, Tristan had said. I have other tables, Hollis had answered. You've got 1 table. He hadn't let go of her wrist. I'm at it. She had pulled experimentally. His grip had tightened, and then Walter Hollister had come from behind the counter. He hadn't said anything dramatic. He hadn't announced himself. He had simply moved with the deliberate purposefulness of a man who had made a decision, and he had stopped directly between Hollis and Tristan Ashford. Close enough that Tristan had to crane his neck slightly to maintain eye contact. Son, Walter had said, let go of her wrist. Tristan had looked at the old man the way a person looks at an obstacle they are reassessing. Who are you? I own this diner, and that's my employee. Let her go. Tristan had released Hollis's wrist slowly, deliberately, in the way that made clear the releasing was his choice rather than a response to any request. He had leaned back in the booth. His friends had quieted, watching. Old man, Tristan had said, you need to go back behind your counter. I think you and your friends need to pay your bill and head home for the evening. I think, Tristan had said, standing, you need to watch your mouth. He had been standing then, and he had the advantage of 23 years and roughly 6 inches, and the absolute certainty of someone who had never once experienced consequences. Walter had held his ground. He had not moved back. He had not changed his expression. Get out of my diner. Tristan Ashford hit him. He hit him. Caleb's voice was still low, still quiet, more dangerous for the quietness. He punched him. Hollis's voice had gone flat and careful. The voice of a person reciting testimony rather than reliving memory, because reliving it was not something she could afford to do right now. Walter hit the counter on the way down. Tristan and his friends left. The whole thing was over in maybe 4 minutes. Frank Delaney, the old veteran at the end of the counter, had been staring at his coffee for the entirety of this exchange. I was here, he said without looking up. I didn't do nothing. He paused. I'm ashamed of that. The pipe worker nearest the door said quietly, we all are. Walter said immediately, nobody should be ashamed. The Ashford name in this county means the town stays quiet, and I will not have any of you carrying guilt on account of me. Dad, Caleb said, just that word. I mean it, son. Walter looked at him directly. This is not a problem for you. You have a black eye. I am 79 years old, and I have had black eyes before. Not from rich kids in your own diner. Caleb straightened. Not from someone grabbing your employee and putting you on the floor. Caleb Hollister. Walter's voice had steel in it now, the old authority of a father addressing a son regardless of the years between them. You look at me. Are you listening? I'm listening. The last time you went looking for justice, the way I can see you thinking about, you lost 4 years of your life, and I lost 4 years of you. I did not lose those years to get them back just to watch you walk out that door and throw yourself at an Ashford. The silence in the diner held for a long moment. Caleb looked at his father's face, at the swollen eye, at the split across the bridge of his nose that had not been there the last time he had seen him. Who knows about this in town, Caleb asked. Everyone by now, Frank said. News travels in a small county. And what's the feeling? Frank looked up for the first time. He was 71, wire thin, with the eyes of a man who had seen things in a desert 35 years ago that had rearranged his relationship to fear. The feeling is that Tristan Ashford is untouchable. His father owns the county commissioner. The sheriff's wife works for the casino. The judges all got their judicial campaigns financed out of the same pocket. He met Caleb's eyes. The feeling is that nothing happens to Tristan Ashford. That's the feeling. That has always been the feeling, Caleb said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, what's the current feeling about me? The question was directed at the room, at the truckers, the pipe workers, old Frank, Hollis behind the counter. He was asking it genuinely without irony or performance. One of the truckers, a big man 50-something who had been watching all of this from behind his coffee mug with an expression of extremely careful neutrality, said slowly, word got around you were here about 30 minutes before you walked in. I am not going to pretend otherwise. Word from who? Caleb asked. Highway Network. Somebody saw your bike at the county line. The trucker paused. Your reputation didn't follow you in quiet, Mr. Hollister. No, Caleb said. It never did. Walter put both hands flat on the counter. Caleb, I am asking you as your father, as the man who raised you, as the man who was very grateful to have you come back from the years you were gone. I am asking you to think carefully about what you're planning. I haven't planned anything yet. You're thinking about it. I'm thinking about my father's face. Yeah. Walter's voice dropped. The authority in it had not diminished, but there was something else underneath the authority now. Something that sounded like a man who was aware of his own age in a way that he was not always willing to acknowledge. Son, you were done with that life. I know I was. You swore it. I know. Then think, Walter said, about what it means to go back on a sworn thing. The words landed. Caleb received them. The room received them. Hollis watched the big man in front of her stand very still, and she could see in the set of his shoulders and the particular tension around his eyes that the words had found something real. Then Caleb turned toward the door. I need some air, he said. He pushed through the door, and it swung shut behind him. Walter let out a slow breath. Hollis looked at the door, then at Walter. Is he... He's not gone, Walter said quietly. He's never just gone. He picked up the spatula again. His hands were steady. That's both the thing I love about him and the thing that terrifies me. Hollis picked up the coffee carafe again. Her hands were not steady, but she pressed them steady against the counter. Mr. Hollister, I'm sorry. This is my fault for Hollis Briggs. If you finish that sentence, I will be very disappointed in you. Walter looked at her directly. A young man put his hands on you without permission, and I stepped between you. That is not cause for your apology. That is cause for his. The Ashfords don't apologize. No, Walter said. They don't. He flipped 3 strips of bacon on the grill. The sizzle was loud in the quiet diner. Frank Delaney set down his coffee mug. Walter, he said, I'm sorry I didn't stand up. I've been thinking about that all night. And I need to say it plain. Walter, I was a sailor once. I served. I'm ashamed. Walter looked at the old man. Frank Delaney, you've been eating breakfast in this diner for a decade. You've tipped every waitress who ever brought you coffee, regardless of what you could afford. You've told me where your kids were going to school, and I told you when my arthritis was acting up, and we've never needed more from each other than that. You owe me no apology. I still should have. You're 71 years old. You should have been left in peace, and you weren't, and that's not on you. Outside, nobody in the diner could see what Caleb Hollister was doing, but Hollis was close enough to the window to see his motorcycle at the edge of the parking lot. She watched him open one of the saddlebags. She watched him reach inside. She watched him pull out a leather vest. Old, dark, the back panel covered in patches too small to read at this distance. She watched him hold it for a long moment. She watched him put it back. But before he closed the saddlebag, he hesitated. And it was in that hesitation that Hollis Briggs, 19 years old, who had worked at Maybell's road stop for 2 years and prided herself on reading people accurately understood that whatever Caleb Hollister had decided about the kind of man he was going to be for the rest of his life, that decision was currently under renegotiation. He stood there with the saddlebag open and the vest still in his hand, in the cold November wind moving against his jacket, and Hollis could see his face clearly through the window. And his face was doing something she had not seen a grown man's face do in a very long time. It was the face of a man who was negotiating with himself about something that had no clean answer. He put the vest back, he closed the saddlebag, he walked back inside. He sat down at the counter. He said to his father's back, "Order me coffee, and tell me everything you know about who that boy's father is now." Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he set down the spatula again and turned around. "Caleb, Dad, I'm not putting it on. You heard me out there. I'm not putting it on. I'm asking questions, that's all. Questions lead places. Sometimes they lead away." Walter studied his son. He studied him the way a man studies something he loves and fears in equal measure. The way parents look at grown children who carry both your best qualities and your most dangerous ones in proportions you never quite manage to control. He poured coffee. He slid the mug across the counter. Vincent Ashford built his casino empire over 3 decades, Walter said. Started with a single card room outside Wichita Falls. Expanded through a combination of genuine business sense and the particular flexibility of ethics that comes with operating in industries where the line between legal commerce and other things is frequently blurry. How old is he now? 61. Widower. By most accounts, a man who learned the hard way that the loyalty of paid men is a commodity with an expiration date and has adjusted his strategy accordingly. And he runs the county. He runs the county the way a clock runs on its spring, quietly, continuously, with most of the people in it not understanding that he's the reason any of it works the way it does. Caleb wrapped his hand around the coffee mug. The warmth was something to focus on. And the sun, Walter said, is what happens to a boy who grows up knowing the center of gravity is his family. He's not evil, he's incomplete. He was never taught that other people were real. You just got hit in the face by him. I know what I got hit by. I also know what I saw when I looked at him. Walter paused. A young man who has never once faced a consequence. Not one. Who has never needed to develop the character that consequences build. It's not an excuse, but it's a reason. Some people would call those the same thing. Some people would be wrong. Caleb drank his coffee. He was quiet for a long moment, thinking, and it was a specific kind of thinking. The kind Hollis recognized as a man working through options rather than reaching for his first instinct. His phone sitting face up on the counter beside the mug buzzed once. He looked at it. The number was a number he did not recognize. A 940 area code. Wichita Falls. The message was 4 sentences. You should come back. Your father isn't the first. There have been others. Ask around. Caleb looked at the screen for a long time. He did not show the message to Walter. He did not show it to Hollis. He turned the phone face down on the counter with a care that was deliberate, and he finished his coffee and he said to his father, I need to make a phone call. I'll be outside. Caleb, it's a phone call, Dad, that's all. He stood up. He pulled his jacket on. He walked out into the parking lot. The cold hit him in the face. It was a clean cold, the kind of cold that woke you up rather than wore you down. He stood beside his motorcycle, and he looked at the saddlebag, and he looked at the diner, and he looked at the highway, and he pulled out his phone, and he called the only person on earth whose read on a situation like this he trusted completely. Jonas Crane, who went by Webb to anyone who had known him longer than a month, picked up on the third ring. Caleb, I need you to drive out to Mineral Wells, today if you can. There was a pause on the other end, the pause of a 63-year-old man making a calculation about his own day in the immediate vicinity of an old friend's voice. What's the situation? My father got hit by an Ashford last night. Which Ashford? Vincent's boy. Tristan. Webb did not say anything for a moment. And you're calling me from where? The diner, outside the diner. Are you wearing it? No. Are you thinking about wearing it? I was, 20 minutes ago. I'm not now, but I just got a text from a number I don't know telling me my father isn't the first. The first what? That's what I need to find out. Webb was quiet again. Caleb could hear him moving on the other end, the familiar small sounds of a man preparing to leave a house. Keys, a jacket, the dull thump of boots being pulled on. I'll be there in 3 hours, Webb said. Where do you want to meet? The Bluebird in Mineral Wells, back booth. All right. Webb. Yeah. There's something else. There's a feeling I'm having that I can't put my finger on about all of this, about the timing, about the message I just got. You don't get those feelings for nothing. No, Caleb said. I don't. He hung up. He stood in the parking lot for another minute looking at the highway. The trucks moved past in the steady rhythm they always moved in. The world was indifferent to whatever was happening in his particular life on this particular morning, and there was a comfort in that indifference. The highway had been there before him. It would be there after him. The question of what he did between now and then was his question alone. He walked back inside. Walter was at the grill. Hollis was wiping down the counter. Frank Delaney had finished his biscuits and was working on his second cup of coffee. Caleb sat down at the counter. Dad, he said. Yeah. You said the boy's father is 61. Has he been in this diner before? Walter turned around. He looked at his son. Twice, years ago. Once about 15 years back, once about 10. Both times alone. Both times he ordered coffee and a piece of pie and sat at this counter, and we talked about nothing in particular for about 40 minutes, and then he paid and tipped $20 and left. Did you know who he was? I knew. Did he know who I was? Walter looked at him for a long moment. He knew, Walter said. He's always known. There are things, Caleb, that I haven't told you about your grandfather, about what your grandfather did before he died, about what that man across the county has been carrying for a very long time. The diner was quiet around them. Hollis had stopped wiping. Frank had set down his coffee. What are you saying? Caleb said. I'm saying, Walter said carefully, that I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you something for about 20 years, and the right moment has never quite arrived, and now it's arriving in a very inconvenient way. Tell me. Not here, not now, not with the breakfast rush about to start. Tonight, after we close. You come back here and I'll tell you what I should have told you a long time ago. Caleb looked at his father. All right, he said. All right. The bell above the door rang. Two more truckers came in. The breakfast rush, such as it was, had begun. Walter turned back to the grill. Hollis picked up her coffee carafe. Frank Delaney left his $3 on the counter and stood up and walked out the way he always walked out, with the careful deliberateness of a 71-year-old man who knew exactly how his knees were going to feel the rest of the day. And Caleb Hollister sat at the counter of his father's diner and looked at his coffee and thought about a text message from a 940 area code and a vest he had not put on and a phone call he had made to a man who was driving toward him right now. And he understood that the day was no longer his own. The day belonged to a question. And the question was bigger than what had happened the night before. The question had been waiting for him for a very long time, and the question was about to be asked. The Bluebird Diner in Mineral Wells had been operating under that name since 1974, and the coffee remained famously beloved by everyone who drank it, which was a kind of accomplishment in a part of Texas where most diners serve coffee strong enough to be classified as a chemical weapon. Caleb took a booth in the back corner. He ordered coffee and eggs. He waited. The man who slid into the booth across from him 20 minutes later was 63 years old, built like something that had been put together for industrial purposes, with a gray beard trimmed to a precise half-inch and eyes the color of old nickels. His name was Jonas Crane. He went by Webb. He had known Caleb Hollister for 31 years, which meant he had known him since before the violence, and through it and out the other side. And there were approximately 4 people on Earth whose read on Caleb's internal state Caleb trusted completely. Webb was one of them. Webb looked at him across the table. He looked specifically at the absence of the vest. "You didn't put it on," Webb said. "I almost did. And then you didn't. And then I didn't." Webb wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. The coffee was good. He took his time with the first sip. "Tell me about the message," he said. Caleb pulled out his phone. He showed Webb the 4 sentences. Webb read it twice. He set the phone down. "Whoever sent that," Webb said, "wants you to do something specific. They want you to start asking questions in places where the questions will get reported back to whoever's actually running things. That's the architecture of it. You're being used as a flashlight." "By who?" "That's the question." "2 options," Caleb said. "Either someone is genuinely trying to help me, or someone is trying to pull me into the middle of something that has nothing to do with my father." 3 options, Webb said. "The third is that both are true. Someone who knows something is trying to help you while also moving you exactly where another party wants you to be. The world is complicated, Caleb. You know this." Caleb drank his coffee. "Then we start asking questions," he said. "But we start asking them in places that aren't obvious. We don't go to the bars. We don't go to the casino floor. We don't talk to the people who would be the first to hear we're talking." "Where then?" "Diners," Caleb said. "Small ones, off the main roads. The kind of places where if something happened, the owners would remember it, but would never have told anyone in any official capacity. Because the people who do the official asking are the people who work for the man whose son hit my father." Webb nodded slowly. It was the right read. "I'll take the eastern route," Webb said. "You take the western. We meet back here at 6. We compare notes." Webb: "Yeah. Don't tell anyone you're doing this. Not the people you usually tell. Not yet." Webb looked at him for a long moment. "You think it's that deep?" "I don't know what I think, but the text came from a 940 number, and the area code is Wichita Falls, and that's where the casino was built first, and that's where my grandfather did the last thing he ever did before he died. I don't know what I think. I just know I don't want anyone moving ahead of us until we understand what we're moving toward." "All right," Webb said. 6 o'clock. He finished his coffee in 2 swallows and slid out of the booth and was gone. Caleb sat alone for another minute. Then he paid the check. He left a tip that was more than the bill. He walked out into the cold and got on his motorcycle and turned west. The first diner he stopped at was a place called Henderson's, about 11 miles down the road. A box building beside a gas station. The kind of place with 8 booths and a pie case. and a single waitress who had been working there longer than most of her customers had been alive. Caleb ordered coffee. He sat at the counter. He waited for the conversation to find him, which it always did in places like this, if you sat long enough and looked like you had time. The waitress was named Doreen. She was 68. She had been at Henderson's for 31 years. Her hair was white and her hands were steady, and she had the particular kind of warmth that came from a woman who had decided somewhere along the line that strangers deserved kindness, whether or not they had earned it. "Passing through," she said. "Visiting my father. He runs a place over on 287. She looked at him for a moment. Something registered behind her eyes. "Walter Hollister." "Yes, ma'am." "How is Walter?" "He's been better." Doreen looked at him a second longer. "I heard," she said quietly. "How did you hear, Key?" "Same way everyone hears." She refilled his coffee. "You're his boy. I see it in the eyes. He used to come up here for pie when the diner was closed for renovations in 2007. Sat right there." She pointed to the third stool. "Quiet man. Kind. He still is." "I figured." She paused. She looked around the diner. Two truckers in a corner booth. A young couple at a table near the window. Nobody close enough to hear. She lowered her voice anyway. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes, ma'am." "Are you here because of what happened to Walter, or are you here because of what happened to Earl?" Caleb did not change his expression. "Tell me about Earl." Doreen looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the door. Then she looked back at Caleb. "Earl Sutter," she said, "ran a body shop and a coffee counter about 40 minutes south of here. 81 years old. 3 weeks ago he was hospitalized. Broken jaw, 3 ribs, concussion that he didn't recover from clean. He's home now, but he doesn't talk much." "What happened to him?" "What everyone says happened is that he fell." "What actually happened?" Doreen lowered her voice another notch. "What actually happened is that 3 young men came into his coffee counter, and one of them got rough with his granddaughter. She's 17, works the counter on weekends. And Earl stepped in, and then Earl was on the floor, and then they left. And Earl's son drove him to the hospital and told the doctors that Earl had fallen." "Why?" "Because Earl told him to." "Why?" Doreen looked at Caleb directly. "Because the boy who put hands on his granddaughter was in Ashford." Caleb did not move. "You know that for certain." "I know it because Earl's son told my husband, and my husband told me, and I have not told anyone else because Earl asked us not to. He said his family had been through enough, and he was not going to be the reason it became more." "How old were the friends?" "20s, all of them, 3 of them, same age as the Ashford boy." "When?" "October 9th. Caleb wrote nothing down. He did not need to. "Doreen, has there been anyone else? Any other story like this?" She looked at him for a long moment. "There's been one more I'm sure of. Maybe a second. There's a woman runs a coffee place outside Decatur. Iris. Her father had something happen in September. She wouldn't say what, but she stopped letting her father work the counter alone after." "Iris what?" "Iris McCade. The place is called the Filling Station, off Highway 380. "Thank you." "Mr. Hollister." "Yes, ma'am. I am telling you this because Walter was kind to me one time when he had no reason to be. I had a granddaughter going through something hard about 4 years ago. I drove down to his diner one Saturday because I needed to be somewhere that wasn't my own kitchen, and I sat at his counter and he gave me coffee and pie, and he did not ask me a single question. He just let me sit there. And when I left, he said, 'You come back anytime.' And he meant it, and I have not forgotten that. He doesn't forget things like that either." "I know he doesn't." She paused. "What you do with what I just told you is your business. But I would ask you to remember that Earl Sutter is a quiet man who would not want his name used in something loud." "His name won't be used in anything loud," Caleb said. "You have my word." She nodded. He paid for his coffee. He left $40 on a $6 tab. He rode west. He stopped at 2 more places that afternoon. One was a feed store with a small lunch counter where the man behind the counter said he had not heard anything, but his eyes said he had heard plenty and was not going to say it. The other was a truck stop where one of the regulars, a retired sheriff's deputy named Olin, drank his coffee and listened to Caleb's question and put down his cup. You're asking about the Ashford boy. I'm asking about whether there's a pattern. There's a pattern. Olin was 74. He had retired from the sheriff's department 11 years before. He had watched the office change in ways he did not approve of, and he had stopped going to the annual retirement dinners about 6 years back, which was a kind of statement in a county where retired deputies generally kept showing up out of habit. There have been 3 incidents I know about in the last 6 months, Olin said. All of them involve the same general scenario. A young man, 23 years old, comes into a small business with 2 or 3 friends. Something happens that draws an older man into the conflict. The older man gets hurt. Nobody calls it in. Or if they do, the report quietly goes nowhere. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked. He drank his coffee. And because I have been waiting for someone to ask. He set the cup down. I want you to understand something, Mr. Hollister. I am not a man who has any love for outlaw motorcycle clubs. I have spent 40 years in law enforcement, and what I think of the Iron Vow I will not say out loud. But I know who your grandfather was. I knew him in the 70s when I was a young deputy, and he was already an old man. And whatever else he did with his life, he did one thing for me personally that I have never forgotten. And so I am telling you what I know because there is a debt in it that has nothing to do with the law. Caleb did not ask what the debt was. He had a feeling after the morning he had had that he was going to find out before the day was over. He thanked Olin. He paid for his coffee. He stepped outside. His phone was buzzing. It was Webb. You first, Webb said. 3 incidents, maybe 4. All in the last 6 months. All matching the same pattern. Young man, 23 friends with him. Older man steps in. Older man ends up hurt. None of it reported. My count is 2 more on top of yours. 1 outside Bridgeport, 1 in Jacksboro, same pattern. The Jacksboro one was about 10 weeks ago. Old man named Petrie, he didn't survive it. Caleb closed his eyes. How? Bled internally for 2 days before anyone took him to the hospital. He was running a small repair shop. There's a granddaughter, 19. The pattern is identical. The boy who hit him was Tristan Ashford. There were witnesses. Nothing was reported. How do you know it was Tristan? Because I just spent 2 hours with the granddaughter. She knew exactly who he was. She watched her grandfather die because she didn't think anyone would believe her. Caleb stood in the parking lot of the truck stop and looked at the sky. The sky was the gray of winter coming. He had not eaten anything all day except the eggs at the Bluebird, which he had pushed around the plate and not really touched. Webb. Yeah, this isn't a boy with a temper. No, it isn't. This is something being staged. That's what I think, too. Caleb stood there a moment longer. Meet me back at the Bluebird at 6. I have one more thing I want to check. What? I want to find out who sent me the text. He hung up. He got on his bike. He turned the engine over, and he rode north toward Wichita Falls, because the only person he knew who could trace a 940 number to its owner without a warrant was a man he had not spoken to in 9 years and who lived in a single wide outside Wichita Falls with 3 dogs and a server rack that was older than most of the people in the county. The man's name was Marlon Pace. He had been the Iron Vows information guy for 15 years before Caleb had left, and he had stayed in that role for another 4 years after. And then he had stepped out the way Caleb had stepped out, but he had stepped out into a quieter version of the same skill set, which was to say that Marlon Pace now did a kind of work for a kind of person that involved finding out who had said what to whom and getting paid for it in cash. Marlon was 65. He was wiry. He had a beard that had gone white in patches like an old dog's coat. He opened the door of the single wide at 4 in the afternoon with one of the dogs at his ankle and a cup of coffee in his hand, and he looked at Caleb on his porch and he said, "Well, there he is. Marlon, come in, brother, come in. I figured I'd see you sooner or later, just didn't figure on today. You knew I was coming. I knew somebody was coming. I figured it would either be you or it would be somebody you sent. I'm glad it's you. Marlon stepped back. Caleb walked into the trailer. It smelled like coffee and dog and the faint copper smell of old electronics. There were 3 monitors set up on a folding table. One of them was showing a security feed of the trailer's exterior. The other 2 were showing things Caleb chose not to look at directly. Sit, Marlon said. Caleb sat. I'm here because I got a text. 940 area code. Caleb looked at him. I didn't send it, Marlon said. But I know who did, and I know why. Talk to me. Marlon pulled up a chair. He set his coffee down. He looked at Caleb the way an old friend looks at someone he hasn't seen in a long time, and is glad to see anyway, even when the circumstances of the seeing are not good. There's a man in this county, Marlon said, who has been very patient for a very long time. You and I both know who he is. We helped end him 25 years ago. We did not end him hard enough. He came back. He has been quiet for a long time. He has been building something quietly, mostly outside our line of sight. And about 4 months ago, he started doing something different. He started getting close to the Ashford boy. Roan Mercer. The name sat between them like something cold. Roan Mercer, Marlon said. Tell me what he's doing. He's running the boy. How? Through a bar in Fort Worth, a man named Dale Brennan, who has been on Roan's payroll one way or another for about 12 years. Roan put Brennan in front of the Ashford kid about 3 months ago. Comped drinks, VIP rooms. The kind of attention that makes a 23-year-old who has never been told no feel like the world has finally recognized him. And in the middle of all that, Roan started introducing situations. Small at first, then larger. The pattern you've been tracking today, the old men in the diners, every one of those incidents had Roan or one of his people in the vicinity, not as participants, as witnesses, as people who could later confirm what happened. He has been building a file. For what? Marlon leaned back. For a war. Caleb did not move. Roan has spent 8 years rebuilding what we tore down 25 years ago. The operation is smaller than it was, but it's denser, harder to break apart. He has been moving people through this corridor again for the last 3 years, and nobody has caught it because nobody has been looking. The casino has been looking the other way, partly because Vincent Ashford has been distracted with his own problems, partly because Rowan has been careful, partly because the parts of the law enforcement apparatus that should be paying attention are run by people who answer to Vincent. What does the war give him? Cover, chaos. The casino and the old Vow people pointed at each other long enough for him to move the last pieces of his operation back into permanent positions. By the time the dust settles, he is not the man anyone is looking at because we will all be looking at each other. And the text. The text, Marlon said, is from a friend of yours from a long time ago, a man who is in a position inside Roan's network that he does not want to be in anymore. He has been feeding me information for about 5 months. I have been holding it. I have been holding it because we did not yet have the right person to give it to. The text was sent because the person who sent it has been waiting for you to come down here, and when he heard Tristan Ashford hit your father, he understood that the moment had arrived. He is asking for your help. He is also pointing you exactly where Roan wants you pointed, which is at Tristan and at Vincent. The difference is that he is telling you what Roan is doing, so you know. Caleb sat with that for a moment. Who is the friend? I am not going to give you the name today, not because I do not trust you, because his life depends on him not being named. When this is over, if it ends well, I will introduce you. He would like that. Caleb nodded. What do you need from me, Caleb? I need everything you have on Roan's current operation. Locations, personnel, vehicles, the distribution points. I need it in a form I can take to someone with a badge. Fed. I think it has to be. Because the locals are bought. Because the locals are bought. Marlon stood up. He walked over to a metal cabinet behind the monitors. He unlocked it with a key that hung around his neck. He pulled out a manila folder thicker than Caleb had expected. This is 6 months of work, Marlon said. 3 of the 4 distribution points. 6 of the 11 names, the vehicle registrations, the shell company structures with the timelines of when they dissolved and reformed, the bar in Fort Worth, the locations on the highway where the transports are happening. It is not a complete picture, but it is enough to act on. He set it on the table. You did all this. I did all this because the friend who sent you the text has been getting me what I needed, and because I owed you and your father something I have been waiting 9 years to pay. Marlon, don't, Caleb. Take the folder. Go do what you have to do. Come back and tell me how it ended. That's all I want. Caleb stood. He picked up the folder. Thank you, brother. Yeah, go. He left. He rode south through the gathering dark. He met Webb back at the Bluebird at 6:15. He set the folder on the table between them. Webb looked at the folder. He looked at Caleb. What is this? This is everything Marlon Pace has been building for 6 months. Webb opened it. He turned through the pages. He turned through them with the focused attention of a man who knew exactly what he was looking at and what it was worth. 3 minutes passed, then 5, then 10. He closed it. This is enough for federal indictment, Webb said. That's what I think. We have to be careful with this. We cannot take it to the county. We cannot take it to the state. We have to take it to the field office. And we have to take it through someone who has a reason to act fast. I have an idea about that. Talk. Vincent Ashford. Webb looked at him. You want to take this to Vincent Ashford? I want to talk to Vincent Ashford. He has a federal contact. He has used that contact before for things related to casino licensing. He has a reason to want Roan dismantled that has nothing to do with us, and he has the access to make the federal call happen in days instead of weeks. You are about to walk into the office of the most powerful man in 3 counties and ask him to help you with the problem his own son made worse. Yes. Caleb. Webb. The thing about Vincent that nobody who works for him understands is that Vincent has been waiting for a long time for someone to come at him in a way that is not about money or territory. Vincent has been managing money and territory for 30 years. He is 61 years old. He is a widower. His son is the boy who hit my father. Whatever Vincent Ashford is, he is not stupid. And he is not, I think, what most people think he is. You think? I think there is a story in our family that I have not been told yet. My father is going to tell it to me tonight, and I have a feeling that when he tells me what it is, my understanding of why Vincent Ashford might agree to a meeting will change. Webb sat back. All right, he said. When do you want to meet him? Tomorrow night, neutral ground. I will pick the place. He will come or he will not come. If he comes, we will know everything we need to know about what kind of man he is by how he walks in and what he says first. And the folder. The folder I keep with me until I am sure Vincent is going to be on the right side of this. If he is, we use it. If he is not, we find another way. Webb nodded. You think he will come? I think he will come. I do not know why I think that. I just do. The 2 men sat for a long moment. Outside the parking lot, lights had come on. The truckers were arriving for the evening shift change. The waitresses were moving through the booths with the practiced rhythm of women who had done this work for so long, it had become indistinguishable from breathing. Caleb. Yeah. Whatever your father tells you tonight, whatever it is, call me after. I do not care what time. I will. Webb stood. He left a 20 on the table for the coffee. He walked out. Caleb sat alone for another 5 minutes. Then he got back on his bike and he rode back to Maybell's road stop. The drive was 40 minutes. He took it slow. He let the cold air work against his face. He let the sound of the engine fill his ears and push out everything else. The diner was closed by the time he arrived. The neon sign was off. The interior lights were down except for the small fluorescent over the counter. Walter was inside. The chairs were already up on the tables. The grill was clean. Walter was sitting at the counter with 2 coffees in front of him. Caleb came in through the back. He sat down beside his father. Drink it before it gets cold, Walter said. Caleb drank. Walter wrapped both hands around his own mug. He looked at his son for a long moment. What did you do today, Caleb? I asked some questions. What did you find? I found that what happened to you was not the first time. There have been at least 5 incidents in the last 6 months. The pattern is consistent. Tristan Ashford is at the center of every one of them, and he is being run. Run by who? Roan Mercer. Walter closed his eyes for a moment. Roan Mercer is alive, Walter said. Roan Mercer is alive. He has been quiet for a long time. He has been rebuilding, and he is using Tristan to start a war between what is left of the Vow and the Ashford organization. Once we are pointed at each other, his operation moves back into the corridor permanently. Walter was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I knew that man should not have been let go. You knew. I argued otherwise at the time. I argued otherwise because I thought destroying the operation was sufficient and that destroying the man was different from destroying the operation. I was wrong about him. I have been wrong about him for 25 years. Dad, I was the one who argued for it, Caleb. Walter looked at his son directly. That is one of the things I have been waiting to tell you. 25 years ago, when the Vow and the Ashford organization both moved on, Roan, I was the mediator between them. Vincent Ashford did not trust the Vow not to overreach. The Vow did not trust Vincent not to use the moment to consolidate. I had relationships on both sides. I had been the common point in this county for 10 years already by then, mostly through running this diner and being a person who could be talked to without consequence. They asked me to mediate. I mediated. And when the question came up of whether Roan would walk away alive, I argued for it. I said the principle of letting a man live was more important than the practical case for the alternative. I argued well. I won the argument. And Roan walked away. And here we are. Dad, you did not know I was involved. No, I never told you because the part of your life that overlapped with that part of mine was already complicated enough. And because I did not want you to carry the weight of a decision I had made. And because, frankly, I have spent 25 years quietly hoping that I was right about that decision. And every year that went by without Roan resurfacing was a year I let myself believe I had been right. And now I find out that he has been here in our county for months. And he has hurt people. And he hurt you because of a decision I made. Caleb did not say anything for a moment. Dad, you made the decision you made because you are who you are. I would not change you. I would not change what you argued for. I would not undo what you did. Caleb, I mean it. I would not change you. You raised me to believe certain things about who men are supposed to be. I did not always live by those things. I spent 16 years not living by them. And the only reason I came back is because you never stopped living by them yourself. If you had stopped, I would not be sitting at this counter right now. I would be dead, or I would be in prison, or I would be somebody else entirely. The fact that you argued to let a man live when you could have argued the other way is part of why I am the man I am today. Whatever Roan does next, he does not undo that. Walter looked at him for a long time. Son, he said, yeah, there is one more thing. Tell me. Walter took a breath. Vincent Ashford and I have known each other for 31 years. We have not been friends in any way the world would recognize. But we have known each other, and there is a piece of history between Vincent Ashford and your family that goes back further than 31 years. It goes back to a night in 1986 when your grandfather was still alive. There was an ambush on a road outside of Wichita Falls. 2 factions met. The meeting went wrong. Your grandfather rode away from it. He came home that night. He told me one thing about what happened, and he made me swear I would never tell anyone, including you. He held that promise out of me until the day he died. What was it? He told me that on the way out of the ambush, he saw a kid in a drainage ditch. The kid was 23 years old. The kid was bleeding out from a leg wound. The kid was not from our side. The kid was from the other side. And your grandfather rode back. He turned his bike around. He went back into a situation that was already over. He pulled the kid out of the ditch. He got the kid to a hospital. He left the kid there and rode home, and he never told anyone he had done it. Not the vow, not the kid's people. Nobody. Caleb sat very still. Dad. The kid was Vincent Ashford. Dad. Vincent Ashford has known for 30 years who pulled him out of that ditch. He found out 8 years after it happened. He has never said anything directly to any member of our family because he did not know how. The world he came from did not have a comfortable language for a debt of that size. Caleb closed his eyes. That is why he came to this diner those 2 times years ago. Yes. That is why he never sent anyone after me when I left the vow. Yes. And his son hit you in this diner. His son hit me in this diner. The 2 men sat in silence for a long moment. Walter finally said, Caleb, I am telling you this tonight because tomorrow you are going to do something. I do not know yet what it is, but you are going to do something. And when you do it, I want you to understand that the man you are going to be dealing with has been carrying a debt to our family for longer than you have been an adult. And the way he handles that debt when this thing comes to him is going to tell us everything we need to know about whether he is a man worth working with or whether he is a man we have to handle some other way. Dad, that is all I have to say tonight, son. You do with it what you need to do. Caleb sat for a long moment. Then he reached across the counter and he put his hand on his father's hand. Walter's hand was warm. The athletic tape was still on his knuckles. Caleb did not say anything. He just held his father's hand for about 30 seconds. And Walter, who had not received that kind of touch from his son in something like 20 years, did not say anything either. He just let his hand be held. Then Caleb stood up. I am going to make a phone call, he said, and then I am going to come back inside and you are going to make us something to eat. And we are going to sit at this counter and we are going to eat it together. And tomorrow I will do what tomorrow needs. All right, son. Caleb walked outside. He stood in the dark beside his motorcycle. He pulled out his phone. He called a number that he had memorized that morning when Webb had read it to him off the back of a card he kept in his wallet. The phone rang twice. A voice answered. This is Ashford. Mr. Ashford, my name is Caleb Hollister. The pause on the other end of the line lasted exactly 2 seconds, long enough that Caleb knew the man on the other end had stopped what he was doing. Mr. Hollister, I would like to request a meeting. Where and when? Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, the Bluebell truck stop on Highway 180, the back lot. It has been closed since 2019. There will be nobody there. I know the place. You come alone. I come alone. No drivers, no backup. If you bring people, I will know and I will leave. If I bring people, you will know and you will leave. Understood. Mr. Ashford. Yes. I am not coming to that meeting for a fight. I am coming to that meeting to talk. I am telling you this because I want you to come into that lot understanding what kind of meeting it is. A longer pause. Mr. Hollister. Yes. I have wanted to have a conversation with someone from your family for a very long time. I have not known how to ask. I will be there tomorrow at 8. Alone, and I am grateful that you called. The line went quiet. Caleb stood in the dark beside his bike and looked up at the sky. The sky was clear. The stars were the cold stars of November in Texas, sharp and high and uncountable. He stood there for a long minute. Then he went back inside and his father made him eggs, and they ate together at the counter of the closed diner, and they did not say very much and they did not need to. The meeting at the Bluebell truck stop the next night happened exactly the way Caleb had set it up. Vincent Ashford pulled into the back lot at 5 minutes to 8 in a black SUV. He drove himself. He got out alone. He stood beside the vehicle in a coat that was expensive but not ostentatious. He was 61 years old. He was medium height. He had the compact physical presence of a man who had stayed in shape out of discipline rather than vanity. Caleb had parked at the edge of the lot 10 minutes earlier and walked the last 50 feet on foot. Force of habit. You arrived quiet so you could hear what was already happening. The 2 men met in the middle of the empty lot. Mr. Hollister. Mr. Ashford. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Thank you for asking. Most men in your position would not have. Most men in my position did not have their son put Walter Hollister's face into a counter. Vincent's voice was even, controlled, and carrying beneath the control a current of something that Caleb, after a moment, identified as genuine anger. Not performed anger, real anger turned inward at something Vincent was holding himself responsible for. "I owe you an apology," Vincent said. "And before anything else is said, I want to make that clear. I am not asking for anything from that apology. I am not using it as a negotiating position. What my son did was wrong. It was cowardly. It was the act of a boy who has been allowed to behave like a child for 23 years because the people around him, including me, failed to draw lines that meant something." Caleb looked at him for a long moment. "I hear you. I also owe Walter Hollister a direct apology. I intend to deliver it in person if he will allow it." "That is his call." "Yes, it is." Caleb let the silence sit for a moment. Then he said, "You know about Roan Mercer?" The name landed exactly as Caleb had intended it to, as a test, dropped without preamble, watching the other man's face for the millisecond before his expression was managed. What Vincent's face did in that millisecond was not surprise. It was something closer to confirmation, the expression of a man who had been carrying a suspicion and just had it validated. "I have been aware of his presence in this area for approximately 6 weeks," Vincent said. "I have been trying to verify whether his presence was coincidental. It is not coincidental." "No," Vincent said. "It is not. He has been moving through my son's social circle through a third party, a man named Dale Brennan who runs a bar on the south end of Fort Worth. He has been buying my son's friends with free bottles and VIP access for 3 months. I should have caught it sooner. I did not because I was not paying close enough attention to my son's social life. And because I did not, my son walked into Walter Hollister's diner drunk and angry and with another man's fingerprints all over the evening." Caleb stood there in the cold and looked at the man across from him. "Mr. Ashford." "Vincent. Vincent, I have something I would like to show you." He pulled the manila folder out from inside his jacket. He held it out. Vincent took it. He opened it under the security light at the edge of the lot. He turned through the pages with the careful focus of a man who knew exactly what he was looking at. When he closed it, he looked at Caleb for a long moment. "This is enough for federal indictment." "That is what I am told." "You want me to use my contact. I want you to use your contact. And I want you to understand that I am bringing this to you rather than going directly to the federal office myself because I believe you have a reason to want this dismantled cleanly and because I believe you and I have an opportunity here to handle something the right way, together, without the war that Roan is trying to start." Vincent held the folder against his chest. He looked down at the asphalt for a long moment. When he looked back up, his eyes were doing something that Caleb had not expected to see on the face of a man like Vincent Ashford. Something that looked in the cold light of the security lamp very much like the eyes of a man who had been waiting for a very long time to be asked exactly this question. "Mr. Hollister." "Caleb." "Caleb, I will make the call tonight. I will have movement within 72 hours. And I will tell you something now because I think it is time you knew. There is a debt I have owed your family for a very long time. I have never known how to address it. I would like with what is in this folder to begin addressing it. And I would like separately to talk to you about my son. Because what my son did to your father is a thing he and I both have to answer for. And I would like to find a way to answer for it that is more than money." Caleb looked at him for a long moment. "I have an idea about that," Caleb said. "But I would like you to come to my father's diner tomorrow night after we close, and the three of us will talk about it together. Because what happens to your son next is a thing my father deserves to have a voice in. I will be there." "Vincent." "Yes. My father told me last night about a road outside of Wichita Falls in 1986, about a man who turned his bike around." Vincent's face did something that Caleb would remember for the rest of his life. "He told you," Vincent said quietly. "He told me." The older man's eyes were wet now. He did not wipe them. He stood there in the cold parking lot, 61 years old, the most powerful man in 3 counties, and his eyes were wet, and he did not try to hide it. "I have wanted," Vincent said, "to thank your family directly for 30 years. I have not known how. I do not know how now. I would like to come to the diner tomorrow. Come to the diner tomorrow, Caleb said. The two men stood there for another moment. Then Vincent extended his hand. Caleb took it. They shook once, and then they let go. Vincent got back in his SUV. Caleb walked back to his motorcycle. And Caleb Hollister stood beside his bike in the cold November dark and listened to the SUV's engine fade down the highway, and he understood that the day had ended on a piece of ground that was very far from where it had begun, and the work of the days ahead was going to be harder than the work of the day behind him. But at least for the first time since he had walked through the door of his father's diner and dropped a coffee mug on the floor, he could see the shape of the road that was in front of him. The road went through a young man named Tristan Ashford. The road went through a man named Roan Mercer. And the road went through a kitchen with a grill in it and a counter and a girl named Hollis and an old veteran named Frank who would be there at 5:58 in the morning. And at the end of that road, if Caleb did not stumble, was something that looked very much like the thing his father had spent 22 years building, which was a place where men could become better than they had been. Vincent Ashford arrived at Maybell's road stop the next night at 9:40. The diner had been closed for an hour. The neon sign was off. The chairs were up on the tables. Walter was behind the counter wiping down the prep area with the patient repetition of a man who used physical work to slow his own pulse. Hollis had stayed. She had not been asked to stay. She had looked at Walter Hollister moving behind his counter with the careful, over-controlled movements of a man managing pain, and she had decided that leaving was not something she was capable of doing in good conscience. Caleb was sitting at the counter with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour before. The bell above the door rang once when Vincent walked in. He stood just inside the door for a moment, looking at Walter across the empty diner. He had taken off his coat in the car. He was wearing a dark sweater and slacks and the kind of shoes a man wears when he has been considering carefully what kind of presents he wants to bring into a room. Walter set down the rag. Vincent. Walter. The two men looked at each other across the length of the diner. There was history in that look, layered history, the kind that accumulated between two men who had orbited the same geography for 3 decades and never quite found a clean way to categorize what they were to each other. Come in, Walter said. Sit, there's coffee. Vincent walked to the counter. He sat one stool down from Caleb. Walter poured a mug and slid it across to him. Vincent wrapped both hands around the mug. He did not drink immediately. He looked down into the coffee. He looked at Walter. He looked at Hollis, who was at the end of the counter, trying very hard to be invisible. Miss Briggs. Sir, I want to say something to you directly, before anything else is said in this room tonight. Hollis stood up straighter without meaning to. My son put his hands on you without your permission, Vincent said. He frightened you. He humiliated you. He did it in your place of work where you had every right to feel safe. He did it in front of his friends who laughed. He has not apologized to you. He has not yet been required to. That is a failure on my part. I am sorry. I am sorry for him because that is my responsibility as his father. And I am sorry to you directly because you deserve to have a man whose name carries the weight that mine does tell you to your face that what happened to you was not acceptable. Not for any reason, not in any context. And I want you to know that if you ever for the rest of your life see my son in any setting and he behaves in a way toward you that is anything less than fully respectful, you may contact me directly, and there will be consequences. He will not be able to talk his way around. Hollis did not know what to say. I do not need you to forgive him, Vincent said. I do not need you to forgive me. I am not here for that. I am here so that you hear it from me. That is all. Thank you, sir, Hollis said quietly. Vincent nodded. Then he turned to Walter. Walter. Yes. I have been a coward for a long time about something. Walter waited. I have known for 30 years who pulled me out of that ditch. I found out 8 years after it happened. I have come into this diner twice in the last 15 years, and both times I sat at this counter, and both times I almost said something, and both times I did not. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. The truth is that I was afraid. I was afraid of what it would mean to say it out loud. I was afraid that putting words to it would make me responsible for it in a way I had been avoiding being responsible for. Your father saved my life. He did not have to. He had every reason not to. And he did, and he never told anyone, and he never asked for anything in return, and he died without ever once approaching me about it. For 30 years I have carried that. I have not known what to do with it. I have not known how to thank a dead man. I have not known how to thank a living family. And then my son hit you in your own diner. And I had to face the fact that I had spent 30 years not figuring out how to be worthy of what your father did for me. So I am telling you now, Walter, thank you for 30 years. Thank you. Walter did not say anything for a long moment. Then he reached across the counter and he put his hand over Vincent Ashford's hand. Just that, just the weight of it. My father, Walter said, did not turn his bike around because he calculated anything. He turned his bike around because there was a kid in a ditch. That is the kind of man he was. He did not need a thank you. He did not want a thank you. He would have been embarrassed by a thank you. He would have flipped you an egg and called it even. Vincent's eyes were wet. I would have eaten the egg, he said. I know you would have. The two men stayed like that with Walter's hand on Vincent's hand on the counter for about 10 seconds. Then Walter let go, and he picked up the coffee pot, and he refilled Vincent's mug, and he refilled his own, and he refilled Caleb's, and he refilled Hollis's. And the four of them stood and sat in the closed diner at 9:45 at night, and the world arranged itself around them in a way it had not arranged itself in a long time. Now, Walter said, tell us about the boy. Vincent took a breath. My son, he said, is 23 years old. He has never worked a job. He has never been told no in any context that mattered. He has been raised in a house with 3 staff and a driver and a security detail. He has never carried his own groceries. He has never cleaned his own bathroom. He has never had a conversation with another human being in which the other human being was not in some way being paid to listen to him. He is not evil. I want to be very clear about this. He is incomplete. The parts of a man that get built by friction with the world have not been built in him. I have not built them. His mother did not get the chance to build them. And the people I pay to be in his life have actively prevented those parts from being built because their job is to make his life easier, not better. And he hit my father, Caleb said. And he hit your father because he was drunk, because he was angry that an old man had told him no, because he had spent 3 months being told by Dale Brennan and the people around Dale Brennan that he was untouchable, and because nobody at any point in his life has ever made him sit in the presence of something he damaged. What do you want? Caleb said. I want to know what you want. Caleb looked at his father. Walter nodded once. I want your son, Caleb said, to come to this diner 6 in the morning Monday. He comes in through the back. He works 30 days, no pay, no special treatment, no protection detail, no Ashford name used to smooth anything over. He comes here as what he is, a 23-year-old who owes a debt. He works dishes, he works tables, he works the grill if my father will trust him near it. He does whatever my father tells him to do. He does it without complaint. And when customers are rude to him, and they will be rude to him because this county knows what he did, he absorbs it. Because that is what people who work in service absorb. Vincent listened without interrupting. He will be required, Caleb continued, to apologize directly to Miss Briggs on his first day. Not on a later day, not when it has become more comfortable. On the first day, with me and my father in the room. He will be required to mean it or he will be sent home. And he will work alongside her for 30 days, and he will treat her with the respect she has earned in this diner over the 2 years she has worked here. If he steps wrong with her one time, he is done. No second discussion. Understood. He does not come in your car. You drop him off a block away. You drive in the other direction. This only works if he is here without you standing behind him. Understood. At the end of the 30 days, if he has done the work, he goes home. If he has not done the work, we have a different conversation. Vincent looked at Caleb for a long moment. This is not punishment, Vincent said. This is something else. This is something else. What is it? It is the chance, Walter said from behind the counter, for your son to find out whether there is anything in him besides what you have built and what the world has built around him. It is the chance to put him in a place where the Ashford name does not protect him and see what is underneath. I have been doing this work for 22 years in this diner, Vincent. Young people walk through that door who are not what they could be. Some of them leave the same. Some of them leave different. I do not know which one your son is. I am willing to find out. That is what I am offering. It is not a small thing, and it is not punishment. Punishment is about making a person suffer in proportion to what they did. I have no interest in suffering. I have interest in whether your son is going to spend the next 40 years of his life running the same play, walking into rooms and taking up all the space and treating whoever is smaller than him like furniture, or whether he has enough actual human material in him to become something different. If he has the material can be worked with. I have worked with worse. Vincent did not respond for a long moment. When he did, his voice had changed. It had dropped. It had lost some of its control. He has the material, Vincent said. I have to believe he does, but nobody has ever treated him like the material mattered. They have either been afraid of his name or they have been paid by it. Nobody has ever just told him the truth. We will tell him the truth, Walter said. All right. Monday morning, 6 o'clock, back door. He will be there. Vincent stood up. He set his coffee mug down. He looked at Walter and at Caleb and at Hollis, and then he looked at the diner itself, the peeling counter, the patched booths, the wobble of the ceiling fan that had been wobbling for as long as the diner had been called Maybell's. Walter. Yes. This is a good place, Chachi Chase. It is a place. It is a good place. I will see you Monday. He walked out. The bell above the door rang once. The headlights of his SUV swept across the front windows. He was gone. The three of them stood and sat in the silence he left behind. Hollis was the first to speak. He is going to be terrible, she said. Probably, Walter agreed. He is going to be rude and difficult, and he is going to think this is beneath him. Almost certainly. And you are going to what? Just be patient with him. Walter looked at her. Hollis, what changed you in whatever ways you have been changed that were worth changing? She thought about that. People who did not give up on me when I made it easy for them to. There you go. Tristan Ashford arrived at the back door of Maybell's road stop at 5:58 Monday morning. Not 6. 5:58. Hollis was the one who heard the knock because Walter had sent her to unlock the kitchen entrance while he got the grill started. And when she opened the door and found Tristan Ashford standing there in work boots and dark jeans and a plain gray sweatshirt with no logo on it, her first thought was that he looked smaller than he had that night. Not physically. He was still the same height, same build, but something about the absence of his friends and his watch and his context had reduced him to his actual dimensions. And his actual dimensions were less impressive than his performance of them had been. He looked at her. She looked at him. You are early, she said. Yeah. Come in. Walter is at the grill. He stepped inside. He stood in the kitchen doorway looking at the space with the expression of a man who had walked into something and was now understanding that the something was real. Walter turned from the grill. Tristan. Mr. Hollister. His voice was careful, controlled, not humble, not yet. Because humility was something you arrived at rather than performed at the door. Apron is on the hook. Wash your hands at that sink. Soap is on the left. Tristan tied on the apron. He washed his hands. He came back into the kitchen. Before we begin, Walter said, there is something that needs to happen. Hollis. Come here, please. Hollis came to the kitchen. Walter turned to Tristan. You are going to apologize to her. Now, while I am standing here, and you are going to mean it, or you are going to walk back out that door and we will tell your father that this did not work and you will go home. Tristan looked at Hollis. He did not look at the floor. He did not look at Walter. He looked at Hollis directly. His face was open in a way it had not been the night he had grabbed her wrist. There was no performance in it. There was something closer to fear. Miss Briggs. Yes, I am sorry that I put my hand on you. I am sorry that I scared you. I am sorry that I treated you like you were not a person. I do not have a good reason for what I did. I was drunk and I was being stupid, and I have been raised in a way that made it possible for me to do that without thinking about it. And that is not an excuse, it is just the truth. I would understand if you do not forgive me. I would understand if you do not want me here. I am asking you to let me work because Mr. Hollister and his son have decided to give me a chance, and I would like to take it, but if you tell me to leave, I will leave. Hollis looked at him for a long moment. You can stay, she said. You work. You stay out of my way unless I need you for something. You do not call me sweetheart. You do not call me babe. You call me Hollis, or you call me Miss Briggs. You make eye contact when I talk to you. You do not interrupt me. You do what I ask the first time I ask. And if you do all of those things for 30 days, then at the end of it, we will see where we are. Yes, ma'am. Hollis. Hollis. Go to work. She walked back into the dining room. Tristan stood for a moment in the kitchen with his apron tied tight against his stomach and his hands clean and the grill smell of bacon already filling the space. And Walter watched him from behind the grill, and Walter saw something move across the young man's face that he had been hoping to see. Not change yet, just the conditions in which change was possible. Get the coffee going, Walter said. Pot is on the counter, filters in the drawer below, 3 scoops of grounds. Tristan? Yes, sir. You are going to be terrible at this for the first 3 days. Everybody is. Do not let being terrible at it make you defensive. You are not being graded on how good you are. You are being graded on whether you keep showing up. Yes, sir. Yes. The first week was the first week. Tristan was terrible at the work in the ways Walter had predicted, and in some additional ways Walter had not. He held dishes like they might transmit something. He refilled coffee with the mechanical precision of someone performing a duty rather than serving a person. When a trucker named Dale asked him twice to wipe down the booth before he sat, Tristan did it, but the set of his jaw made clear what he thought of the request. Mrs. Whitlock came in for lunch on the second day. She was 83. She had lost her husband in January. She had been coming to Maybell's twice a week for 11 years, and she had developed the particular trait of some elderly regulars of treating waitstaff as an extension of her own household staff. Not cruelly, just unconsciously, with the assumption of constant availability and unconditional pleasantness. She sent her soup back twice. The first time because it was too hot, the second time because it was then too cold. Hollis watched Tristan carry the bowl back to the kitchen the second time. She watched his face. She saw the moment it lasted maybe 2 seconds where everything in him wanted to say something, to assert something, to establish through language that he was not a person who returned soup twice. He did not say it. He brought the bowl back without a word. He heated it to what Walter told him was the correct temperature. He returned it to Mrs. Whitlock, who said, "Thank you, dear," without looking up from her crossword. Walter noticed. He did not say anything to Tristan about it. But that night when they were doing the close of day cleanup, and Tristan was mopping the floor with the defeated energy of someone who had just completed the worst day of his recent life, Walter said from behind the counter, "Mrs. Whitlock lost her husband in January. She has trouble sleeping. She comes in for the soup because her late husband used to make it for her on cold days, and she says ours is close." Tristan stopped mopping. "She is not trying to be difficult," Walter said. "She just does not have many things left that feel familiar." Tristan stood with the mop in his hands. "How do you know that?" he said. "Because she told me. Because I asked." Walter turned off the counter lights and went to his office, and Tristan stood in the half-dark diner holding a mop, and he looked at the booth where Mrs. Whitlock had eaten her soup, and his face did something he was not aware of doing. By the end of the first week, the county had opinions. Of course it did. Tristan Ashford working a lunch counter at a roadside diner was the kind of story that traveled fast. Frank Delaney came in every morning at 5:58, as he always did. He ordered his coffee and his biscuits and his sausage gravy. He watched Tristan with the patient attention of a man who had spent a year overseas learning to distinguish between people who were performing competence and people who actually had it. On the fourth day, Frank set his phone on the counter without looking up and said, "You know what I did before I retired?" Tristan, refilling his coffee from the wrong side and catching a look from Hollis that made him correct his position, said, "No, sir." Electrician, 40 years. You know what the first thing is when you are learning to read a circuit? No. You stop assuming you know where the power is and you start finding out where it actually is. Frank drank. A lot of young men walk into rooms assuming they know where the power is. They are usually wrong. Tristan looked at him for a moment. You are talking about the diner. I am talking about everywhere. The diner just works as an example. Frank went back to his biscuits. Tristan went back to the coffee carafe. But something had shifted in the set of his shoulders. Small, barely visible. The kind of shift you would miss if you were not paying attention to the right things. Hollis was paying attention to the right things. On the seventh night after the diner had closed, Caleb came back. He came in through the back. He stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Tristan finish wiping down the prep station. He waited until Tristan looked up. "I want to talk to you," Caleb said. "Sit at the counter." Tristan sat. Caleb sat across from him on the customer's side, which was a small thing but a deliberate thing. He poured himself a coffee. He poured Tristan one. He did not say anything for a long moment. "How is the work?" he finally said. "Hard. Yes. I am bad at it. Yes. I am trying not to be. Yes, I can tell." Caleb drank his coffee. He set the mug down. He looked at the young man across the counter from him. "I want to tell you a story," he said. "I have not told this story to many people. My father knows it. The man I called yesterday knows it. About 6 other people on earth know it. I am going to tell it to you because I think you need to hear it, and because the version of me that is sitting here right now is not the version of me that lived this story, and you need to understand that the difference between those two versions is a thing that did not happen by accident." Tristan did not say anything. "When I was 28 years old," Caleb said, "I walked into a bar in a small town in Oklahoma. I had been a member of the Iron Vow Motorcycle Club for 4 years at that point. I had a reputation in the club for being someone who did not back down from things. I had been drinking. I was angry about something that today I cannot remember clearly. I had decided that I was not the kind of man who could be embarrassed in public. I walked into that bar looking for a man I had a problem with. He was not there. There was an old man at the bar instead. The old man was 61 years old. He was the bartender. He had been the bartender at that bar for 20 years. He was not part of any club. He was a man who had a job. He served drinks. He went home at night to a wife and 2 grown children and a granddaughter. That was the entire shape of his life." Tristan was watching Caleb's face. "I asked him a question about the man I was looking for," Caleb said. "He told me he had not seen him. He told me to settle down. He told me I was making the other people in the bar uncomfortable. He used the word son. He said, 'Son, you need to take a breath.' And I decided in that moment that I was not the kind of man who was going to be called son by a 61-year-old bartender in front of a room full of people." Tristan did not blink. "I hit him," Caleb said. "Once with my right hand as hard as I could. He was 61 years old. He was not expecting it. He went down. He hit the back of his head on the bar on the way down. I walked out. I rode away. The next morning, I was hungover. The next afternoon, I started to remember. The next night, a brother of mine came to my door and told me the old man had died. He had bled inside his head for 2 days. He had not woken up the morning after I hit him. He had been put on a ventilator. His family had been called. They had made the decision the second night to take him off the ventilator. His wife had been holding his hand when he died. His granddaughter had been in the room. The diner was completely silent. His name, Caleb said, was Earl Lanigan. He was 61 years old. He was 3 years from retiring. He had been planning to take his wife to Florida. I do not know if they had bought the tickets yet. I know they were going to. Tristan was looking at the counter now. He was not looking up. I served 4 years, Caleb said. Manslaughter, 2nd degree. I was lucky in the way that men like me sometimes get lucky in court. The vow had a lawyer. The witnesses in the bar had reasons to remember certain things and not others. The 4 years was a gift I did not deserve. I have spent the rest of my life understanding that. I have spent the rest of my life thinking about Earl Lanigan. I think about his wife. I think about his granddaughter, who would be in her 40s now. I do not know where they are. I have never tried to find them because I do not think my arrival in their lives would be a gift. There are some things you cannot make right. There are some things you can only refuse to repeat. Caleb looked up at Tristan. Tristan looked up at Caleb. Tristan. Yes, sir. I am not telling you this to scare you. I am telling you this because you are standing right now in a place I stood 30 years ago. You are 23. My father is 79. The thing that was different in your case was that my father did not bleed inside his head. The thing that was different was a quarter inch, a different angle, a different counter. There is no version of that night where you should be sitting at this counter with me drinking coffee. There is a version of that night where you are in a cell tonight and my father is in a hole. The fact that we are not in those two versions is a thing my father gave to you by being lucky and by being stubborn enough not to die. It is not a thing you earned. It is not a thing you should ever pretend you earned. It is a thing you should spend the next 40 years being grateful for. And the way you are grateful for it is that you become a man who does not put another 23-year-old in the position I was in when I woke up the morning after I killed Earl Lanigan. Because that is a position no man should ever be in. And I would not wish it on you. And I would not wish it on the next old man behind the next counter. Caleb stopped. Tristan did not speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was thinner than it had been all week. Mr. Hollister. Yes. How do you live with it? I live with it, Caleb said, by becoming a man who would not do it. By becoming the man Earl Lanigan thought I could be when he called me son. I live with it by making sure that for every minute of my remaining life, I am not the man I was that night. That is the only way I have found. There is no forgiveness for it. There is no forgetting. There is only the work of every day not being him. That is what I have. That is what I am offering you the chance to start 30 years earlier than I started. Tristan put his hands flat on the counter. He looked at them. He looked at Caleb. Thank you, he said quietly. Caleb stood. He left a 5 on the counter for his coffee. He walked to the back door. He turned. Tristan. Yes, sir. Tomorrow morning, 6. Same as today. Yes, sir. Caleb walked out. Vincent Ashford's federal contact moved fast. Faster than anyone had predicted. The warrant package came together in 6 days. On the 8th night after the meeting at the Bluebell, 2 black SUVs that did not belong to the Ashford organization appeared parked across the highway from Maybell's. Webb flagged them immediately. They were not surveillance. They were too visible for surveillance. They were a message. The note appeared at 2 in the morning the following night. It was slid under the back door of the diner. Walter found it when he came in at 4:30. 4 words in block letters. 30 days is too long. Walter called Caleb. Caleb called Webb. Webb called 9 other men. By 5:45 the next morning, there were 6 motorcycles in the parking lot of Maybell's road stop. By 6, there were 9. By 6:30, there were 11. They came in 1s and 2s. Quiet. They ordered coffee. They sat at counter stools and corner booths. They talked in low voices. They did not wear colors. They did not need to. The presence of them in the diner was less like an occupation and more like a congregation. Frank Delaney arrived at 5:58 as always. About time, he said to Walter. Mind your business, Frank. This is my business. This diner is my business, has been for 10 years. He drank his coffee. He did not say anything else. But the way he sat straighter than usual with the deliberate posture of a man who had decided something about his own position was its own kind of statement. Tristan arrived at 5:58 from the other direction and stopped when he saw the motorcycles. He stood outside the back entrance for a moment looking at the lot. Then he went inside. He found Hollis in the kitchen running the dishwasher cycle. He pulled his apron off the hook and tied it without being asked. What is happening? He said. Caleb's people. For protection. Protection from what? There was a note under the door last night. 4 words. The man whose son had your father beaten believes 30 days is too long. Tristan stood very still. This is because of me. It is because of a lot of things. You are one of them. He untied his apron and retied it tighter. He picked up a bus tub. He pushed through to the dining room and started on the counter setup without Walter asking. Walter watched him from the grill. He said nothing, but something in his expression shifted. Small, private. The expression of a man revising an estimate upward. The call came to Tristan's phone at 2 in the afternoon. It came on Brody Lane's caller ID, which was the first indication that Roan had mapped the situation more precisely than expected. Tristan, flat, male, unhurried. You do not know me by name, but you have seen me. Tristan recognized the voice after 2 seconds. The bar, the man who had always been close enough to the conversation to hear it. He kept his own voice completely even. What do you want? I want you to understand something. What you are doing at that diner, the 30 days, the aprons, the whole performance, it is touching, it really is. But it ends today. Your friend Brody is with me right now. He is fine. He is going to stay fine. But I need you to walk out of that diner in the next 20 minutes and get in the car that is going to pull into the back lot. And I need you not to tell anyone, because if you tell anyone, Brody's situation changes. The kitchen was quiet around Tristan. Hollis was 10 feet away, her back to him, working on the prep for the dinner setup. Through the service window, he could see the dining room, the writers at the counter, Walter moving behind the grill with the steady, unhurried authority of a man entirely at home in his own space. Tristan thought for 2 seconds. Then he said, "Give me a minute." 20 minutes, the voice said. Back lot. The line went dead. Tristan stood with his phone in his hand. He thought about Brody, not deeply because he and Brody had never been deep, but with the specific concern of a person who understood that someone was in a bad situation because of their connection to him. He felt the pull of that concern. It was real. He also thought about what Hollis had said to him in the kitchen 6 days ago about what an apology was the beginning of and not the end of. He thought about what Caleb had said to him at the counter at midnight about Earl Lanigan. He thought about who he had been 12 days ago, the boy who had grabbed a girl's wrist in this diner because he could. He walked out to the dining room. He found Caleb at the counter. He set his phone down in front of Caleb without speaking. He told him the call word for word. Caleb looked at the phone. He looked at Tristan. "You could have walked out," Caleb said. "I know. Brody is your friend." "I know that too." Tristan's voice was steady. "But walking out is what he needs me to do, and I am not doing things because someone else needs me to anymore. I am done with that." Caleb was quiet for a moment, holding the phone. "Brody is going to be fine," he said. "He needs Brody functional. He is leverage, not a target." He looked at Webb, who had come off his stool the moment Tristan started talking. "We have a location now. The backlot call means there is a car positioned. Webb, get a plate, and tell my father to stay behind that counter no matter what happens next." Walter said without turning from the grill. "I heard that. I am not going anywhere." "Dad, I am not going anywhere," Walter repeated with the finality of a man who had run out of patience for protective instructions. "This is my diner. I will be in it." The confrontation arrived not as explosion but as confrontation. The kind that happened when two groups of people arrived at the same location from opposite directions with opposite purposes, and the air between them became the thing that determined what happened next. The location was the old freight yard off Route 9. Webb had mapped Roan's operation enough to know it was the operational center. Caleb was there with Webb and 4 men from the old network. 3 of Vincent's men were there too, not enforcers in the old sense. Men who were loyal to Vincent personally and who understood that what was being asked of them was presence, not violence. Tristan was there. He had come with Caleb not because Caleb had asked him to, but because when Caleb was leaving the diner and Tristan had said, "I am coming," Caleb had looked at him for a long moment and then said, "Stay behind me and do not touch anything," which was the closest thing to permission either of them was going to get. Roan Mercer was there. He was smaller than the situation had made him seem. That was always the way with men who built things from a distance. They were most impressive in the abstract. And then you met them, and you found a man in his late 50s with careful eyes and the contained energy of someone who had run on resentment so long it had become his primary fuel source. He had two men with him. He had Brody Lane standing slightly apart, not restrained, but obviously aware that leaving was not available to him. He looked at Caleb. He looked at the men around Caleb. He looked at Vincent's people. He recalculated visibly the way a man recalculates when the room has more people in it than his plan accounted for. "This is more than I expected," Roan said. "It usually is," Caleb said, "when you are working from a 25-year-old map." Roan's jaw tightened. "You think you have stopped something. You have delayed it 6 months, a year. I will find a different route, a different arrangement. You cannot close every road." "No," Caleb agreed. "We cannot close every road, but we can close this one, and we can make sure the federal case that is being built right now includes enough documentation to make rebuilding significantly more difficult than it was the last time." Something moved in Roan's expression. The mention of federal. He had not known about the federal contact. He had known about Caleb's network. He had known about Vincent's cooperation, but he had not traced it forward to where those two things together led. "You are bluffing." "No. Brody," Caleb said without looking away from Roan. "Your phone is in your pocket. Call anyone you want. Tell them where you are. You are free to go." Brody, who had been standing very still and looking like a man who desperately wanted to be somewhere else, said, "Yeah." He walked. Not fast, then faster, until he was past the circle of people and into the dark beyond the freight yard, and the sound of his footsteps was moving away. Roan watched him go. "You had one move," Caleb said. "Using him, he is gone. I have other moves." "Hey, you have two men. You have a network that has been documented and is currently being reviewed by people who have the authority to act on what they find. And you have a choice, which is the same choice you had 25 years ago. Except this time, the people offering it to you have considerably less patience for waiting to see whether you take it seriously." "What choice?" "Stop," Caleb said. "Tonight, walk away from the operation. Cooperate with the investigation. Disappear from this county and every county connected to it. Or do not stop and find out what it looks like when two families who should have been enemies decide to be something else instead." Roan looked at him for a long time. He looked at the riders. He looked at Vincent's men. He looked at the space between them, at all the space that was currently the thing standing between him and a set of outcomes that ranged from manageable to catastrophic. Then he looked at Tristan, because Tristan was there, standing behind Caleb. Not in the position Roan had spent months arranging him to be in. "You were supposed to be exactly what you were," Roan said, and the bitterness in it was pure and unfiltered. The bitterness of a man whose plan had been precise and elegant and had failed at its most human point. "You were supposed to be exactly what you have always been." Tristan met his eyes. "I know," he said. "I am working on that." Roan made his decision. He made it the way men make decisions when the options have genuinely narrowed. Not with drama, not with a final speech, but with the quiet capitulation of someone who had run the numbers and found that they did not add up the way they used to. He put his hands up. Both men behind him did the same. The FBI arrived 11 minutes later, which was 4 minutes after Vincent's contact had confirmed the warrant was signed. They secured the freight yard. They secured Roan and his two men. They began the process of working backward through the documentation that Caleb and Webb had assembled. It took the rest of the night. By 4 in the morning, 3 distribution points had been identified and flagged for coordinated action. By 5, the operation that Roan Mercer had spent 8 years quietly reconstructing was being dismantled from 4 directions simultaneously by people with the legal authority to make the dismantling permanent. Caleb watched it happen from the edge of the freight yard with his hands in his pockets and his jacket collar up against the November cold, and he felt something that took him a moment to identify. It was the specific relief of a man who had gone looking for justice and found it without having to become someone he did not want to be. He drove back to the diner. Walter was there, because Walter was always there. Walter Hollister did not sleep during situations and never had, and he had been behind his counter at Maybell's road stop since midnight, making coffee for whoever needed it, doing inventory, with the systematic focus of a man who needed his hands occupied while his mind was somewhere else. The diner was full in the strange blue hour before dawn, with an assortment of people who had no particular reason to be there, except that they needed to be somewhere, and somewhere had become Maybell's road stop on Highway 287. The riders were there, Vincent's men were there, Frank Delaney was there, Hollis was there. She had been there since midnight, and she had made the coffee and cleared the cups and done the things that needed doing because that was what Hollis Briggs did and had always done. Caleb walked in through the back. Walter looked up. They looked at each other across the length of the diner. "It is done," Caleb said. Walter let out a long, slow breath. "Anyone hurt?" "No, Dad, no one. I promise." Walter nodded. He picked up the coffee pot. He started filling cups. Tristan arrived at 5:45, not from Vincent's car, on foot, which meant he had walked from wherever Vincent had dropped him, which, given the geography, was at least 8 blocks. He came through the back door, and he was carrying 2 large supply boxes, the dry goods delivery that was supposed to come at 7, which he had apparently intercepted from the delivery driver and carried himself. He set the boxes down. He tied on his apron. He looked at the diner full of people who had been part of the night he had just been part of. And he moved to the coffee station and started a fresh pot without being asked. Walter watched him from the grill. Hollis watched him from the counter. Frank Delaney on his stool at 5:58 as always watched him pour the first cup and bring it to the nearest table to one of the riders who was showing his age in the set of his shoulders. The rider said, "Thank you, son," without looking up. And Tristan said, "Yes, sir," and he moved to the next table. Walter cleared his throat. "Tristan?" Tristan turned. "Why are you early?" The question was quiet, genuine. The same question Walter asked the morning sky every day when he unlocked the diner. Not "why are you early," but "what brought you here? What kind of man are you becoming? What does it mean that you showed up before you had to?" Tristan held the coffee pot in both hands. He looked at Walter Hollister, the bruise around his eye finally fading to yellow at the edges. The athletic tape off his knuckles now, the spatula in his hand, the grill behind him, and the 22 years of early mornings that this specific man represented. He thought about the answer. He did not reach for the performance of an answer. He reached for the actual one. Because good men show up before they are needed. The diner was quiet. Then Frank Delaney picked up his coffee cup and drank. One of the riders shifted in his seat. Hollis pressed her lips together in the way that somewhere private would have been a different expression. Walter Hollister looked at the young man standing in his kitchen holding a coffee pot at 5:45 in the morning. And something in the old man's face moved. Something deep and unhurried and certain. He turned back to the grill. "There is biscuit dough in the bowl," he said. "Get it in the oven. We open in 15 minutes. "Yes, sir," Tristan said. He set the coffee pot down. He found the bowl. He found the pan. He did the work. Vincent Ashford came in at 7. He sat at the counter. Not in a booth, not at a table. At the counter. The way the regulars sat. The way people sat when they wanted to be in the life of the place rather than apart from it. He ordered coffee. He did not announce himself. He did not reference anything that had happened the night before. When Tristan brought him his coffee, Vincent looked at his son for a long moment. Tristan looked back. "You did well." Not loudly, not for the room, just directly to his son. The way a statement is made when it is meant as truth rather than performance. Tristan nodded. He set the coffee down. He moved to the next customer. Vincent watched him go. Then he looked at Walter, who had been watching this exchange from the grill, with the expression of a man who had seen exactly what he hoped to see. "You did something I could not," Vincent said. Walter shook his head. "I did not do anything to him. The work did it. The people in this diner did it. I just kept the door open." "That is not nothing." "No, it is not." They were quiet together for a moment. 2 men in their 60s, one who had built an empire, one who had built a diner, both of whom had made decisions in their lives that had cost them things they could not fully account for, and both of whom were sitting in a roadside diner at 7 in the morning on the other side of a night that had closed something and opened something simultaneously. "My grandfather was a cook," Vincent said. Walter looked at him. "For 30 years, in San Antonio. He fed people who could not always pay. He never talked about it as charity. He talked about it as what you did when you could cook and someone was hungry. Walter nodded slowly. I want to do something for this diner, Vincent said. Not a check, not a renovation. Something that reflects what this place actually is. Walter was quiet for a moment. You want to know what this diner actually is? Yes. It is a place where people who are tired come and have someone pay attention to them for the duration of a meal. That is all. That is the whole of it. If you want to do something for it, send me customers who need that. That is the only gift this place can use. Vincent looked at him. He nodded, the nod of a man who had received something worth receiving. All right, he said. He drank his coffee. He left a tip that was more than the bill, which was not unusual in Maybell's road stop among the people who understood what they were tipping for. The trafficking network that Roan Mercer had spent 8 years rebuilding was dismantled across 3 counties in the space of 72 hours. 11 people were charged, 4 of whom cooperated immediately, 2 of whom had information that extended the investigation into adjoining territory. It was not the kind of dismantling that made the evening news. It was the kind that happened in federal documents and case files. Roan Mercer was charged. He did not make bail. He had run out of the kind of resources that made bail possible because the resources were part of the operation and the operation was gone. Dale Brennan's bar closed 3 weeks later. Brody Lane sent Tristan a text that said, I heard what happened. I do not really know what to say. Tristan replied, you do not have to say anything. I will see you around. It was not a reconciliation. It was not a severing. It was the acknowledgement, understated and American, that some things needed time to find their right shape. Frank Delaney at his counter stool at 5:58 on a Tuesday morning told Walter that he had been thinking about volunteering at the Veterans Center on Fridays. Walter told him that sounded like a good idea. Frank said he had been putting it off for 2 years. Walter said most good things got put off for too long. Frank said, yeah. Hollis Briggs enrolled in community college for the spring semester. She did not quit the diner. She adjusted her hours. Walter adjusted the schedule without comment. Caleb stayed, not permanently, not with a forwarding address, but in the specific way that a person stays when they have understood something about where they belong. He rode when he needed to ride. He came back when he came back. He called Walter every other day at a time that was late enough that the diner was closed and early enough that Walter had not gone to sleep yet, which was a narrow window. And he hit it consistently. He did not put the vest away, but he wore it differently than he had worn it at 28. Not as an announcement of what he was capable of, but as a reminder of what he had chosen not to become. There was a difference. It was the most important kind of difference there was. The days that followed had a shape to them that nobody in the diner had quite anticipated. The story of what had happened, the parts of it that could be talked about anyway, moved through the county the way stories moved in places like that. Not in headlines, in quieter ways. A man at a feed store mentioning to another man that he had heard something. A trucker at a coffee counter saying he had been there that morning and seen for himself. The county had a way of metabolizing its own news. The Ashford name continued to mean what it had always meant in certain respects. But it meant something slightly different now in others. And the difference was not in anything Vincent Ashford had said publicly. It was in the fact that his son was working a counter at a diner on Highway 287, and the fact that he was still doing it after his 30 days had been served, and the fact that Vincent Ashford himself had been seen more than once, sitting at that same counter eating eggs and biscuits like any other man. People watched these things. People drew their own conclusions. The conclusions varied. Some people decided that the Ashford organization had gone soft. Some people decided that something deeper had shifted. Most people, the ones who did not have a stake in either interpretation, simply noted that something had changed and went on with their lives. What had changed was harder to name than any of the speculations got at. What had changed was that Walter Hollister had been hit in the face by a young man who did not understand what he was doing. And the response to that had not been the response everyone had expected. And the response that had actually come had moved through the county like a question that nobody had asked but everybody had felt. The question was whether the way the county had been running was the only way it had to run. And the question once asked was not unaskable again. On the morning of the 31st day, the day after Tristan Ashford's arrangement with Maybell's road stop was formally complete, Walter Hollister came in at 4:30 as always. He started the grill. He got the coffee going. He did not lock the back door when he came in. He left it open. At 5:43, before the first light was fully established, before any of the regulars had arrived, the back door opened. Tristan Ashford walked in. He was alone. He was not carrying anything. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the kitchen the way a man takes in a room he has decided to claim some part of. Then he stepped inside, washed his hands at the sink, and found his apron on the hook where it always was. He looked at Walter. Walter looked at him. "Your 30 days are up," Walter said. "I know," Tristan said. He tied the apron strings. He moved to the coffee station and started the morning pot. Caleb was standing at the end of the counter in the shadow of the kitchen doorway. He had come in at 4. He had not announced himself. He was drinking coffee. He was watching the young man tie his apron. He was seeing in Tristan Ashford at 23 years old something that looked very much like the man Caleb Hollister had once been at 28. The same square set of the shoulders, the same particular care in the hands, the same slight uncertainty about where to put himself in a room. The difference was the door. The door behind Tristan was not the door of a bar in a small town in Oklahoma. The door behind Tristan was the back door of Walter Hollister's diner, and the door had been left open, and Tristan had walked through it on his own. Walter watched the boy for a moment longer. Then he turned back to the grill. His hands moved with the authority of a man who had been doing this specific work for 22 years, in this specific place, for the specific reason that people needed someone to show up and do it. The coffee began to move through the machine. The grill came up to heat. Outside, the highway was waking up. The first light was finding the edge of the horizon. And the little bell above the front door of Maybell's road stop was absolutely still in the early morning air, waiting for the first customer who needed what the diner had always had to give. A cup of coffee, a place to sit, a person who paid attention. Caleb set down his mug. He walked the length of the counter. He stopped beside his father at the grill. "Dad." "Yeah, I am going to stay this morning, through the breakfast rush, if you do not mind." "I do not mind, son." Walter did not look at him. Walter kept his eyes on the grill, but his hand, the one with the spatula in it, paused for one full second longer than the work required. And in that second, the entire shape of 22 years of mornings reorganized itself around a small fact, which was that for the first time in a long time, the diner had 3 Hollisters in it. Caleb went to the coffee station. He picked up the carafe. He started the second pot. The breakfast rush came in waves that morning the way it always did. Frank Delaney at 5:58, 2 long-haul truckers behind him, a pipe crew of 4 men who had been working the night shift outside Bridgeport. By 6:30, every counter stool was occupied. By 7, the booths had filled. Walter worked the grill. Tristan worked the floor. Hollis worked the counter. Caleb worked the coffee station and the dishes and whatever else needed doing, and he did it without ceremony, with the focused attention of a man who had finally found a kind of work his hands had been waiting for. At 7:45, Vincent Ashford came in. He sat at the same stool he had sat at the morning after the freight yard. Tristan brought him coffee without being asked. Vincent watched his son move through the dining room. He did not say anything about it. He drank his coffee and he ate a plate of eggs and biscuits and gravy that Walter put in front of him without comment, and when he was done, he left $20 on a $9 tab and stood up to leave. "Vincent," Walter said. Vincent turned. "Yes. Your boy is doing all right." Vincent looked across the diner at Tristan, who was clearing a table and listening to a trucker tell him a story about a dog the trucker had owned in 1994. "He is. He has more in him than anyone gave him credit for. Including me. Including you." Vincent nodded. He put on his coat. He paused at the door. "Walter." "Yes. I am going to send some people here. Not all at once, over time. People who work for me or people who used to. People who are tired. People who need a place to sit for an hour without being asked anything. I will not announce them. I will not pay you for them. They will just come." "That is how it works," Walter said. "That is how it works." Vincent walked out. The bell above the door rang once. Frank Delaney, still at his stool, watched the door close. He turned to Walter. "Walter." "Yes, Frank." "I called the Veterans Center yesterday. I am starting Friday." "Good. I am going to teach a class. They asked me, basic electrical, for the boys coming back who do not know what to do with their hands yet." Walter looked at him. "Frank Delaney." "Yes. That is a good thing you are doing. I should have done it 2 years ago. You are doing it now. That is the part that counts." Frank drank his coffee. He left his $3 on the counter. He stood up. He walked out the way he always walked out, with the careful deliberateness of a 71-year-old man. But there was something different in the set of his shoulders, and Hollis noticed it from the counter, and she pressed her lips together in the way that somewhere private would have been a smile. Hollis was the next to leave for the day. Her shift ended at 9. She untied her apron. She hung it on the hook. She picked up her bag from behind the counter. "Mr. Hollister." "Yes, Hollis." "I will see you Wednesday." "Wednesday." She paused at the door. She looked at Tristan, who was at the coffee station, refilling a carafe. "Tristan," he turned. "Yes, Hollis." "You did all right." "You—" She walked out before he could respond. The bell rang once. Tristan stood with the carafe in his hand and watched her cross the parking lot to her car, and his face did something quiet, and he set the carafe down and turned back to the work. Caleb watched all of this from the dish station at the back of the kitchen. He watched his father at the grill. He watched the young man at the coffee station. He watched the regulars eating their breakfast, and the truckers paying their checks, and the cold November light coming through the front windows. And he understood in a way he had not understood at any other moment in his 58 years on Earth that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He thought about Earl Lanigan. He did not push the thought away. He let it sit. Earl Lanigan was 61 years old. He had been 3 years from Florida. His granddaughter had been in the room when he died. Caleb thought about her now. He thought about her every day. He had not stopped thinking about her in 30 years, and he was not going to stop thinking about her in the 30 years he had left. But this morning, for the first time in a long time, he thought about her with something other than the dead weight of unredeemable debt. He thought about her, and he thought about Tristan Ashford pouring coffee at 5:43 in the morning, and he thought about his father at the grill, and he thought about the kid in the drainage ditch in 1986, who had grown up to be a man who would walk into a diner and sit at a counter and try to thank a dead man for 30 years of borrowed life. The chain of it, the shape of it, the way one man's decision in one moment rippled outward across decades and into rooms that man would never see. Earl Lanigan had called him son. Walter had asked him to live. His grandfather had turned his bike around. And Caleb Hollister, 58 years old, was standing at a dish station in his father's diner in Parker County, Texas, washing coffee mugs at 9 in the morning on a Tuesday in November. And he was not the man he had been at 28, and he was not the man he had been at 40, and he was not the man he had been at 50. He was somebody new. He had been becoming somebody new for 30 years. And the becoming was not finished. The becoming was never going to be finished. That was the work. That was the whole of it. He set a clean mug in the rack. He picked up another one. He washed it. The morning kept moving. A truck driver named Bo, who had been coming to Maybell's once a month for 6 years, took the stool at the corner. Tristan brought him coffee without being prompted. Bo nodded thanks. Bo did not look at Tristan with anything in particular. Bo had heard who Tristan was. Bo had decided that whatever the story was, it was somebody else's business. Bo drank his coffee. Bo ate his eggs. Bo paid his check. Bo left. That was the way most of it went. The county had absorbed the story the way the county absorbed most stories, with a quiet that contained inside it a million private adjustments, none of which would ever be spoken aloud, but all of which added up to a different kind of place than the place had been 3 months earlier. Vincent Ashford did what he said he would do. Over the following weeks, men and women began showing up at Maybell's who had not shown up before. A retired pit boss from the casino who came in twice a week and sat in the back booth and read paperback westerns and tipped 70%. A widow whose late husband had worked Ashford security for 20 years and who had not eaten breakfast outside her own kitchen since he died. 2 of Vincent's drivers off duty who came in together on Sundays and ordered the same thing every week and called Walter Sir and tipped in cash. None of them were announced. None of them mentioned Vincent. They just came. And Walter fed them. And the diner expanded around them the way it had always expanded around whoever needed to be inside it. Tristan finished out the winter at Maybell's. He had not said anything about staying past the 30 days. Walter had not said anything about asking him to. The arrangement had simply continued the way arrangements continued in places like this, by mutual silence and the daily fact of him showing up. By February, he had learned the grill. By March, he could run the floor alone for the slow hours between the breakfast rush and the lunch one. By April, Walter had stopped telling him what to do most mornings because there was nothing left to tell him. He knew the work. He moved out of his apartment in Fort Worth in the second week of February. He rented a small place 10 minutes from the diner. He bought a used pickup truck. He learned the names of all the regulars. He learned which of them wanted to be left alone in the morning and which of them wanted somebody to ask about their grandkids. He learned that Mrs. Whitlock liked her soup at exactly 175 degrees, and he learned why, and he never let it leave the kitchen at any other temperature. Caleb came and went. He kept the place in Mineral Wells. He spent more nights at Walter's than he did at his own home, but he did not move in, and Walter did not ask him to, because both of them understood that the rhythm of how Caleb showed up was its own kind of presence, and that asking him to be there every night would have changed something both of them wanted to leave the way it was. Webb stopped by every couple of weeks. Marlon Pace came down from Wichita Falls once in early December, sat at the counter, ate 2 pieces of pie, drank 3 cups of coffee, hugged Walter without speaking, and drove home. The friend who had sent the text was eventually introduced to Caleb on a porch in a small town outside Bowie on a Saturday in March. The two of them talked for 2 hours. Caleb did not tell Walter what they had talked about. Walter did not ask. The diner kept opening at 4:30 in the morning. The diner kept closing at 9 at night. The coffee kept getting made. The eggs kept going on the grill. The bell above the door kept ringing every 4 to 7 minutes during the breakfast rush. And the world kept turning. A man Walter Hollister had decided a long time ago was not measured by the room he commanded, or the fear he generated, or the name that opened doors. A man was measured by who felt safe when he walked in. And in the diner that morning at the beginning of the 31st day, and at the beginning of every morning after every person who would come through that door, the tired truckers and the old veterans, and the single mothers counting their change, and the young men still figuring out what they were. Every one of them would find the same thing waiting. Somebody had already shown up. The coffee was already made, and the door was already open.